Two-bit one.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Frasers Perspective Podcast. My name is Natasha Robertson and I am here today talking to Rory Martin, who is the Sustainability Manager for the residential business of Frasers Property Australia. Welcome, Rory.
Thanks, Natasha.
Sustainability Manager. Let's start there. What does a Sustainability Manager do?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably one of the most ill-defined roles you could possibly have. If you're to look at the textbook definition of sustainability, you're looking at pretty much providing for today's generations without compromising the needs of future generations. I'm going to try and make a promise to you right now. I'm going to try and not use that word again for the rest of the podcast. So let's see how we go.
That word being sustainability. Given that you're a sustainability manager, why the desire to not use that word? And what?
So look, the word itself can be ambiguous at best. It can be used for quite a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. It also can be subject to a bit of greenwashing where it's been hijacked and I guess used as a bit of a shiny sales trick. If I was to reframe it and recast it, I'd say really what it's about, certainly in our line of work, is it's change for the better. How can we do things better? How can we create healthier communities, healthier homes and better quality homes? So there are two particular areas that we're really focusing in on in this role, in this part of the business. If we're to take health and well-being, we all know about things like access to parks and, having safe communities for our kids to play in and walk home at night and this kind of thing. But what we're seeing as well emerging in a built form is the whole health and well-being movement, where people are becoming more aware of the materials that are going into their homes. We all know about mold and asbestos and these kind of things, but as some materials become more and more sophisticated, we're starting to find that, there's new forms of asbestos, there's new carcinogens. And so there's whole movements behind that about how we can eliminate some of those products from our homes. So these are the kind of things that we're finding are starting to resonate, with our purchasers and when we've tested this with working groups and focus groups.
That's fascinating to me, especially the idea that you're sort of reframing this idea of sustainability being about, having less impact on the planet into this space where actually we have a healthier impact on the planet and ourselves. So a nice convergence of people and the community or the environment in which they live. You mentioned a little bit about research. How much research have you done and what do consumers or buyers of land and housing from Frasers Property, what do they say? What do they tell you about health, the importance of their well-being in the communities in which they're buying?
So look, we're always on the hunt for latest information, research. We undertake, quite a bit in-house in the different states and geographies we operate in. But we're also looking to academia and we're looking to government. We're forming separate partnerships, with those different entities to try and ascertain, what is it that's going to land with customers? I guess some of the work we've done internally, we're always testing concepts about people's appetite for gas versus no gas homes. Gas was hailed as the transition fuel that was going to save us. We're going to greater and greater extremes now to access that gas, which is damaging the environment considerably, fracking and these kind of procedures. So trying to ascertain where exactly people's appetite is with induction cooking versus gas is really important. So we've done it through surveys with those who've already purchased. We've also done it through in-depth focus groups where we sit groups of people around a workshop table for a couple of hours and go through in detail things that they want and don't want. We park the generalistic terms such as livability and try and get to the core issue because that's the important thing for our customer. It's not what kind of fluffy general thing are you going to give me? What is it that I'm getting for my cold hard cash? So these are the kind of things we're starting to work through now that we can come back to not just the business in general, but right down to individual project level. What's important for your customer on your project in your geography?
That's fascinating to me that you're getting to that level where customers are able to articulate that. It's sort of been my impression that when sustainability, the ideas of sustainability and environment first started getting bandied around, 20 years ago really, it seemed like a very abstract concept. I think what I'm hearing you say is people's perceptions at the consumer level, at the market level, have changed quite dramatically. People really know what it means now and what it means to their hip pocket and to their sense of well-being. One of the projects that I wanted to talk to you about that I think takes into account these larger themes of health and well-being and energy efficiency and most assuredly innovation is something I've heard you talk about called the Passivhaus Project, which is quite a curious name. I mean, what is a passive house? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Okay. Do you want a backstory?
I'd love a backstory.
Okay, so we were doing one of our focus groups probably about 2 years ago, and it was really interesting. We went through a whole load of design charrettes with customers about here's a budget and here's some environmentally friendly things you can do. Went through technologies like geothermal and solar, and we went through passive things like, good glazing and good orientation. Spoke about it in the context of saving money and being good for the environment. And there was a quip from one of the participants who just went, all this stuff, this is just what we expect in a good quality home. And it was a little bit of a light bulb or eureka moment, and it was just like quality. And we took that theme and we continued to test it in different surveys with customers, what is it you would pay extra for? And everyone said, I will pay for quality. Quality is what I expect. There's nothing more disheartening than buying a new apartment and 70 minutes later, you open the cabinet door and it falls off the hinges. So for us, that was a theme we've seen continue to emerge. So I guess building on that theme and keeping the conversation going internally, we got to a point where I guess doing a global scan and just being across, the different tools and tricks we can do in this part of the industry or in sustainability. There's a black mark against me. But Passivhaus was something that was really intriguing. Originally a German standard from the late 70s or early 80s, it focused on minimising the amount of energy a home needed to be heated and cooled. So that was the concept. What entails a passive house? It's a house that is very well sealed. So you don't have, I guess, uncontrolled air coming in and out. Now, I know Aussie homes have been designed to breathe naturally, and that ventilation is very, very important. But the German concept is that you control that air moving in and out, and then you can minimise the amount of energy lost to the heating and cooling of that air. The other thing is getting the insulation levels correct for your climate. It's a bit of a misconception that it has to be pretty much a sealed esky. You pick the insulation levels appropriate for where your geography is. So in Brisbane, you'll have a different solution to Perth, to Tassie, to Victoria. So that's the background and kind of what Passive House is. What we're doing is we are taking a standard Frasers home that's designed in-house. It's going to look like a normal home from the outside, but its walls, its windows and the ventilation unit inside are going to be up-spec'd. So you're going to minimise the amount of heat that's lost through the walls and the windows. And then what we do is we take the exact same house, 2 streets over, looks the same orientation, same size windows, and we do it the way industry would normally do it.
So a standard
Correct.
build.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the reason we got to that is when we had this group from Victoria around the table and we put this idea of Passive House to them, we said, look, guys, we know quality is a big deal for our customer. Why don't we test ourselves against the world's best standard? Let's do a Passive House home and compare it against our standard industry. And we had our design director, we had our state GM, we had our marketing director, construction director, and everyone kind of just quickly looked at each other and went, this is a bit of a no-brainer. So that's what we're doing.
Right. So, I mean, partly obviously motivated by a sense of pioneering spirit on behalf of Frasers, and partly because you genuinely want to know the difference between the energy efficiency in a standard build versus a passive house build. To what end? Like, this is obviously a classic control group study, an A/B test, We'll compare the data from one house with the data from another house. What do you expect to see? How long does it take to get the data together? And I guess once you have the data, what do you do with it? How would this go to change the way we might build our homes in Australia, or is that beyond the scope of the way you're thinking right now?
No, there's a couple of great questions in that. So the first thing we'll do is, yes, it's a controlled study. So we'll look at passive house versus standard house over 12-month periods. So we'll see it in summer and winter. The data we're looking to capture is how much energy do they both use? How much does it cost to heat and cool the home? And how do people feel in the home, compared to maybe their previous home or that kind of thing? Do they feel in the passive house, the quality of air is better, like I don't feel as drowsy, let's say, if I've been there all day? These are the kind of things we want to get to. We want that quantitative data and that qualitative data.
Right. That
then, for us, creates a really strong business case. We're not going to turn around saying, okay, guys, we're all doing passive house. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is go, okay, one, can we do it? And if we can, then where do we want to be? Because we have our standard case and we have passive house, and then we can pick where in the market, or more importantly, we can put it to the market. What do they want? The beauty of what this does, Tash, is that passive house, we're not the first to do it. There's a couple of dozen houses and even an apartment building in Sydney being done at the moment. But we're going beyond the boutique developments that are doing this. We're testing this mass market, and that's never been done before.
Right.
So that's what's really exciting, because then we have a case study that we can take to other parts of the business, and we can also share with the industry as well. Like, we're not doing this 100% just for ourselves. If we can get this kind of innovation into the industry and the lessons shared, then we can help drive things like consumer demand and, equally importantly, the supply chain. There's a cost premium because we're the first ones to put our neck out there and have a go at this. And we're trying to find that fine line between the bleeding edge and the leading edge now.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an art form at this stage, but that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this.
So that's Passivhaus. That's the project you're embarking on.
Yeah.
It actually seems to be quite an exciting project. What else? What other projects are you working on that do you think it would be interesting learnings or interesting objectives that the audience listening to this would like to know?
Yeah, we've got a couple of them. Of course, the Passivhaus home is Victoria, but we've got our brothers and sisters in Queensland and New South Wales and WA all looking in over the ditch to see what way it'll go. Up in New South Wales, we've got a really interesting partnership that I kind of alluded to earlier, where we're partnering with academics, state government and federal government to look at the value of our geothermal units that we have in the Fairwater development. They're another approach to having, I guess, more cost-effective heating and cooling in the home. Just quickly with geothermal, what that is, it's a heat pump, and it replaces your condenser unit that you would have on a typical split system or whatever. And it sends water approximately 65 to 85 metres down into the earth in a loop. And what happens is the ambient temperature of the ground, depending on what season it is, heats and cools that water. So if it's winter above ground and it's quite cold, then the temperature of the earth is going to be warmer than the air. So it naturally heats that water, comes back up, and then a fan blows air across that pipe to heat the home. And then in summer, it flips and it does the opposite. So we're seeing that's have about 60% savings on heating and cooling bills. So that piece of research will, over a 3-year period, look at, well, what's the dollar savings to people that have this technology and how does that impact their lives? We're also looking beyond that in terms of what happens if you pull out all these condensers out of a community. What happens to the urban heat effect when you've got a really hot day? Because you don't have all this heat being put out into the air, is it, let's say, cooler than a neighbouring community that would have all these condensers? So getting a little bit technical now, but what it is, it's linking that quality and that energy piece with health and well-being outcomes. Because if you've got a hot day and your environment is that bit cooler, well, then you're less likely to suffer, heat-related conditions such as strokes and heart attacks and this kind of thing. Right. And the reason why this is really important is if you take Black Saturday, for example, back 10 years ago, sadly, tragically, there was 175 odd lives lost in the fires themselves. But because of the urban heat effect in Melbourne, there was over 350 deaths because of these increased heat in the urban realm triggering these conditions. So this is why this kind of research is really important, to not look at things in isolation around energy, but realise that they're all interconnected. So that's pretty interesting, and it will be pretty groundbreaking, that research.
Fascinating. In
terms of what we're doing maybe on the community side, resilience is a big theme at the moment in the industry. And again, it's a generalistic term that can be used in a number of ways. How it's been used in our context is social and environmental resilience. We know we're having increased environmental shocks and stresses. And similarly, we're having increased social shocks and stresses. When we're talking social shocks and stresses, we're talking about extreme events being shocks, such as terrorist attack or acute failure of transport system. When we're talking chronic stresses, we're talking about communities not connecting, not knowing each other, burdens on the health system, prolonged burdens on the education system. So we've got a project in Mambryn here in Victoria where we're partnering with, again, local and state government. And what we're doing is we're seeing, can we accelerate community development in that project? The theory behind that is that if you accelerate community development and community connection, there's a greater chance that if something happens in the area, people will look out for them. They won't wait for the SES to rock up. There's a kind of an underlying theme or theory that a resilient community is a connected community.
And a self-reliant community.
Correct.
To a certain extent.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you get through all the theory and the technicalities of it, it's basically people looking out for each other like we used to.
Yeah, the whole sort of village concept.
Yeah, there's a terrible kind of story emerged from Hurricane Sandy in New York a few years ago where, again, it was about similarly 170 lives lost in the event, but it was closer to double that died in the days subsequent, where apartment buildings were without power. Elderly people fell in the stairs. People that relied on medication, their medication, expired in the fridge. So taking the kind of really negative outcome there, if those people had neighbours that looked in on them or checked in on them, there's a chance those things mightn't have happened. So that's what we're focusing on our Resilient Membrane project. So getting communities just to take ownership of their community. We had a really interesting example in another project where we ran a resilience event. You can't see my inverted commas here. But
I'll just assure the audience he made the quote marks.
We called it this resilient event. We had only about 20 people in the community rock up, but the event had the SES, they had the fireys, and they had the cops come and do kind of like a community safety event.
Right.
But the amazing thing out of that is out of the 20-odd people that were there was 3 people signed up to be local SES members that night. And that's fantastic because now that community goes from being reactive and waiting for someone to come help them if something happens to having permanent members there who can activate and mobilise straight away. So this is the kind of thing we're trying to do with some of these research and pilot projects.
That's terrific. That's absolutely terrific.
I could talk all day about projects. I think how we make all this happen, you have to have a core strategy around this. These kind of things don't happen accidentally. And the great thing is Frasers has put people in these roles to make these kind of projects happen. It has to come from the project and the project team have to own it. Strategically, we have a different way as our flag on the hill, if you will. But what we're trying to do with these projects is take a different way from what it is to become our DNA.
Well, I just want to backtrack for people that are listening because some people might hear you say a different way and think you mean that, we just do things differently.
So I guess a different way emerged in 2016 after a series of workshops with the whole Frasers Property Australia family. That's where we brought people together going, okay, if we are going to genuinely try and be a sustainable organisation in what we deliver and how we operate, what are we going to commit to? What are the things that are going to set us apart? And from that emerged a few of your usual suspects around energy, water, waste, carbon, these kind of things. But we also had a strong focus on the social side, so health and well-being, community connectedness, equity. And we also had a little bit around the economics and investment side, which was resilience and innovation and responsible investment. So we kind of loosely addressed the triple bottom line of sustainability, which is environmental, social and economic. So that's been the engine room behind all these things that we're doing. These are where those targets sit around reducing the amount of energy that our customers use and that we use. That's led to initiatives like our resilience project. That came out of the resilience target within that strategy. Passivhaus emerged from conversations around energy, which then led into quality. We're looking at a community in New South Wales where we're seeing, can we actually bring zero energy homes to market? The definition of zero energy home we're using is one that's producing more energy than it will consume in 12 months.
How do you do that?
So we're taking the flip side. The theory is to take the flip side to the Passivhaus. So if we're trialling passive approaches in Point Cook, we're looking at the zero energy home with, okay, well, what can current technology allow us to do? So we're looking at solar boosted hot water, so using same principles as solar panels. We're using solar panels as well. We're also looking a little bit at the building fabric about how we can tighten that up without going to the extent of Passivhaus. We're looking at removing gas from the project, having all electric heating, all electric cooking as well. We've got the geothermal units that I mentioned earlier. So it's a combination of the technology bringing it together because there's no silver bullet for any of this task.
Right.
There's no miracle, technology is going to save us. People point to solar. Solar is only good if you've done all the hard work on the home itself, So that's why we're trying to see what works, what doesn't work, what do our customers respond to, and hopefully then clarity starts to emerge about what the sweet spot is for each of our different geographies.
Terrific. So I guess before we wrap up, because we've covered a lot of ground in this particular topic today, do you have some thoughts and comments about where this commitment toward a healthier communities, healthier people, healthier planet is going to lead us via Frasers? What does the future hold?
There's a tongue-in-cheek kind of quote, I don't know who said it, but the goal of every sustainability manager is to do themselves out of a job. Mm-hmm. I don't fear that happening just yet. The reason being, personally, I think the industry is maturing around the technical challenges. We know how to get to zero energy. We have the roadmaps to get to zero carbon and these kind of things. And I think if you put enough smart people in a room with enough money and that you can make a lot of these things happen.
Right.
I think the real challenge, and this is the ever-evolving and ongoing challenge, is that we do so in a way that responds to our customers' and communities' needs, and they're ever-changing. We're seeing how communities are changing. We're seeing how the need for transport changes. And wrapped up in all of that then are those things around energy, water, waste. So I think for us, the biggest challenge is to stay close to our customer, what they need, and then going back to our toolbox or our toy chest and pulling out the different initiatives that we need to service them and meet their needs. So if I was to see where we're going, I think we're going to see eventually a tightening of your regulations and your building codes in Australia to be a bit more in line with some of the international, I suppose, counterparts and that kind of thing. And I think the fact that we've got growing populations in Australia from vastly different cultures is going to present some of the greatest sustainability challenges going forward. So, without having a crystal ball, I think that's kind of where we're going to go.
Fantastic. So lots of technological advancements that we're on the cusp of, much that we can learn from perhaps international standards, but also stuff we can learn from some of the projects that you're running locally, including Passivhaus in Point Cook. So I think we probably need to make a date to come back 12 months from now or 18 months or whenever it is that you have the data together from that particular project and talk about what you found. I think it'll be a fascinating result.
Oh, it'll be fantastic. We're only too happy to do that.
Lovely. We'll book it in. All right. Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up an incredibly interesting subject for today. Thank you, Rory, for being here and talking about all those incredibly exciting projects that you're working on.
Great. Thanks, Tash.